I'm Ashton Addison from Investment Pitch Media, and today on the Crypto Coin Show we have Arjun Kalsy, the head of ecosystem at Mantle Network. Arjun, welcome to the show, and thank you for taking the time.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Very welcome. Excited to dive into layer 2 networks and scalability for blockchain today. We'd love to kick off our conversation by just starting with a little bit on your background in blockchain and how that led to becoming the head of ecosystem at Mantle, and then we'll dive into all the layer 2 details.
Sounds good. The story for me started actually in 2016 when I first came across the Bitcoin white paper. I went through the white paper. I sort of started looking into the ecosystem and kind of became obsessed with this idea of decentralization. I think I kind of realized that this is something which could truly change the world and the way we interact with each other, the way we transact with each other, the way business runs. And that's kind of where, it started for me. And then, I read about Ethereum. And then, of course, at the time, I was in an IT company. Then I was, in 2017, I sort of moved to an AI company in the computer vision space. But all throughout this entire period, I always kept an eye on what's happening in the blockchain space. And then come 2020, once we exited the AI company, I sort of then joined Polygon full time as head of BD and growth. So I was there for almost 2.5 years. So I was amongst the members of the team, and then we ended up growing growing the ecosystem to what it is today. And then it was time for the next challenge, and that's kind of when I met the team at BitDao. I sort of kind of got a sense of what these guys want to do with infrastructure, and it was a very exciting problem to solve. So that's when I decided, okay, this sounds like something which could be like super fun, and so that's kind of how I ended up at Mantle.
Amazing. And Polygon has just grown exponentially, and moving from a layer 2 sort of solution at first to something much more than that, and like an entire ecosystem that's almost bigger than Ethereum's with the amount of dApps and people that are building on it as well. And now I'm curious on that transition onto Mantle and another layer 2 ecosystem. Where did you sort of see the gaps that needed to be filled in the industry from what Polygon, sort of that initial idea of a layer 2 for scalability for Ethereum and these other networks, moving into something bigger? Why start Mantle, and let's just dive into what exactly is Mantle Network.
Sure, definitely. So to talk to you about the transition, essentially, I think at Polygon, what we were able to prove, and what kind of sort of also sort of proved my own hypothesis is that blockchain technology is getting to the point where mass adoption is now possible, right? So we used to always talk about blockchain mass adoption, but for that, the tech has to be ready. And then, at Polygon, very early, a bold bet was taken to, build ZK technology. And then, a bunch of other companies also started building ZK technology like ZK Sync, Scroll. And today, they're like a whole host of startups looking to solve that problem. And then we've got to the point today that, mass scalability now is possible at a technology level. Now, how that has to be solved at the ecosystem level, what that means for the average user, what the value accrual systems look like, these are some of the things which are, still open questions. And, and on an everyday basis, I think some of the brightest minds in the Web3 space are looking at, solving these problems. But I'm very optimistic that, the bedrock is ready. And blockchain has reached a certain level of adoption, and we can only sort of grow from there. I think at Mantle, what was super interesting for me and is the fact that typically if you look at all blockchains, right, like blockchains typically start also very centralized, right? You've got the founder, you have a team, the blockchain, then you build the ecosystem, and over a period of time, you become a decentralized ecosystem, right? Case in point, Ethereum, right, which is almost like a DAO right now, where all the ETH holders vote, etc., on important considerations for the Ethereum network. And at Mantle, we are already a DAO. Right, so BitDao is already a DAO. It's community run, community led. Even when it came to the birth of Mantle, it was birthed by a community decision, where Ben had started a discussion around infrastructure, and then sort of the community banded together and then decided that we should do this. And if you look at how the Mantle ecosystem looks like right now. So at Mantle, we're building a Ethereum layer 2 scaling solution. The entire BitDao treasury is on Ethereum, so we're very Ethereum aligned, sort of in not just in terms of technology, but also to the values of Ethereum, of building something open, permissionless, decentralized, community run, community owned, and community governed kind of infrastructure. But if you look at the entire ecosystem as, if you zoom out and look at it as a whole, you've got BitDao, the DAO and all the Bit token holders who vote and are part of the governance. Then you have all the different companies in which BitDao is invested. You've got ZK-DAO, EduDAO, Game7, and a whole host of other autonomous sort of teams building for BitDao and its associated businesses. And at the same time, you also have ByBit, the exchange, which seeded BitDao. Then you've got ByBit's venture arm, Mirana Ventures, which is an LP in some of the biggest funds in the space like Animoca, Play Ventures, Spartan. Then you've got Yeehaw Games and a few other companies as a part of this ecosystem. So when I looked at it as a whole, I kind of realized that wow, there's already such a huge community there, right? And even the Bit token is fairly liquid. It's listed on all major exchanges. There's a big community, so there's already this great jumping off point, for ecosystem building. And if you're able to build a great piece of infrastructure, then we can take this entire ecosystem together and then move it ahead, together, right? So all of this then moves together, builds value for the Bit token. It sort of turns, the Bit community into one of the largest and most impactful Web3 communities out there, which essentially was the, the design decision behind BitDao, which is to, sort of take the Web3 ecosystem forward. So this is kind of where we realized that, a lot is possible here. I think I was very excited by this challenge. I love the fact that, a community now would be a huge factor into all the important decisions we would take for this infrastructure. I also truly believe that, in some sense, DAO governance is the way forward. And of course, DAO governance still is a problem which has to be solved. We need to figure out effective governance mechanisms, what that needs to look like. But, these are the exciting problems, man. This is the kind of stuff which, which I feel, this is what I want to do. So yeah, a lot of things which have to be solved. Very exciting time for me to sort of use all the knowledge and sort of the understanding I have to build this really large ecosystem. And yeah, so excited.
I'm excited for you, Arjun, and thank you for explaining the BitDao and how it's community governed through the ByBit ecosystem. I see that as a growing part of the industry right now. So I'm looking forward to seeing how that grows. And you mentioned there about the ZK and the zero knowledge networks in layer 2 scaling as well. I'm interested in that.
Yes.
But one of the main sort of contexts behind creating these layer 2 networks was just for scalability in general and for mainstream adoption. I'm curious on finding those specific solutions within Mantle to help the greater blockchain ecosystem with how you see the layer 2 landscape with all these different kind of solutions right now. What exactly, in terms of scaling transactions, how important is that to the layer 2 for Ethereum, for example, and sort of what's the vision behind that?
Got it. A great question. So I want to answer this question in two parts. Right. So number one, let's look at rollup technology as a whole. Right. So to quickly cover, you've got optimistic rollups, and then we have Arbitrum, Optimism, host of other networks which are optimistic rollups, and then we've got like ZK rollups, right? Where ZK rollups haven't gone into production yet. Like most of them are testnets at this point. But what has happened over the last, let's say, 6 to 9 months, right? Ever since we first decided to sort of start building Mantle, is that the delta between optimistic rollups in terms of performance and ZK rollups has continued to shrink, right? To the point where, I think there's a broad consensus in the community, amongst blockchain users, researchers, technology builders, that ZK rollup is now to the point where it's production ready. And that the potential of now ZK rollups to continuously optimize, become like, so for example, the prover algorithms become better. We're able to find ways to decentralize it. You're able to use things like hardware acceleration to further optimize. So you can kind of get a sense that, there's a huge scope for improvement, even though ZK rollups performance is still pretty good. The roadmap is amazing. And that's kind of what our internal researchers also told us, that, while our testnet is optimistic rollup, like we should seriously look at this technology and talk to all the founders out there, do our research, and maybe for mainnet, it just makes sense to be, ZK rollup. So that's kind of like how we're looking at the technology, very excited by the developments in the space. I personally am also talking to all of these different founders and trying to get a sense of what would be the best decision for us as well. Coming to how this plays into ecosystem, right? So technology, great, all this sounds fancy, but what does it mean? Now, if you look at ecosystem development out there, broadly speaking, like let's say, you again zoom out and you look at the ecosystem or what's happening. you will kind of see that all blockchains are trying to solve everything. Like all the blockchains are trying to solve all the problems at the same time, and like everybody is doing in some sense the same things, right? So all the blockchains are trying to build great technology, right? Which is a super expensive problem to solve. Big research teams, product teams. Sometimes all the research doesn't pan out, and you have to keep researching and spending. Every blockchain also wants to build a big ecosystem. So which means big business development teams, marketing teams, incentives. So you've got two very expensive problems, but you have only one treasury to fund them. Right. And if you start to look at what's happening in the ecosystem out there, that most blockchains eventually are cutting to the point where they're bleeding their treasury. Right. If you look at, and the best part is all of this is on chain. So you can check these things. Like you'll notice that in the last bull cycle, if you see some of the outliers of adoption, like let's say Polygon, Solana, and some of the other networks, which also gained like a number of users, you look at the float of those tokens in the market, you will see that the float is trending towards 80, 90%. Right. So in one cycle, a huge amount of expenditure has already been incurred. Right. And at a broad concept level, we're building technology which is supposed to last forever, in the best case scenario, outlive us. Right. And the blockchain continues to thrive. So this kind of system where everybody is trying to solve all the problems by themselves, right, competing against everybody else at the same time, somehow doesn't seem like a very capital efficient model, like something which I've been thinking about for over a year now at Polygon, right, where I was trying to figure out I don't know if this is the best way. And at Mantle, what we want to do is that we want to focus Mantle on building closer and closer to the user, right? So what we want to do is focus on user problems, use our treasury, use our technology, use our teams to basically figure out user side problems and focus a lot more on ecosystem development. While on the technology side, what we're going to do is we're going to work with an existing blockchain, let's say ZK Sync, Polygon, Scroll, Optimism, Arbitrum. So we're talking to everybody at this moment. And what we're going to do is that we'll run the chain, we'll use the BIT token as gas fees, and whatever gas fees I generate, I will essentially remit it back to our technology partner, right? In the sense that infrastructure companies should focus on purely building great infrastructure, and the business development side should be done by another company, right? So instead of having one treasury, now you've got two treasuries, each focused on solving a very specific task, where infrastructure companies are focused on building infrastructure. DAOs, for example, which scale horizontally, like BitDao with the number of users, compared to technology which scales vertically like a stack, DAOs scale horizontally. So DAOs, for example, and other companies focus purely on building business and going closer to the user, and then through gas fees, there's a clear line of value accrual, right? And there are different ways you can build value accrual, but a partnership-driven, collaborative model is what the ecosystem needs versus this system which we have now, where all of us, all the different players have their knives out for each other, and then eventually everybody's trying to solve everything at the same time and not able to essentially solve anything, simply because your focus is split in like 9 different directions. So, a collaborative model where a technology partner focuses on technology, ecosystem focuses on ecosystem, clear line of value accrual, a heavy focus on the different problems you need to solve, because technology and business tend to be orthogonal in nature, right? Is the way forward. And why this is going to work is because this is exactly, if you think about it, the business model of Ethereum in some sense, right? Like Ethereum gained adoption, and then there were scalability problems. So now there was this new scalability layer on top of Ethereum. So today, who is doing business development for Ethereum? It's Optimism, it's Arbitrum, it's Polygon. These guys are bringing the users to Ethereum. So all I'm telling them is Ethereum is here, you guys are here, right? I will be on top of that. Right, and I will build business for you, just like you build business for Ethereum. And essentially, there's a clear line of value accrual right there, right? So let's work together, right? Why should we go into the market and fight with each other? Let's work together, and let's onboard millions of users, and this should be the model for the future, right? Where it's collaborative in approach, right? Versus now everybody's your enemy and everybody's got their knives out. Like I don't see that. That's not somehow in line with Web3 ethos. Like we have to work together, build together, win together. So this is how it has to be.
I love that approach, Arjun, and I agree with the current size of the blockchain industry. It's better to work together to grow than to try to take each other down. And there's a lot of room for growth in all areas. And you mentioned about the end users. Obviously, that's important. You can't have adoption without users. But to get to that point, obviously the ecosystem and development of decentralized applications need to be developed and released in a way that makes it easy for the end users to use, right? and
Exactly.
making the development
Exactly.
ecosystem, whether it's the programming languages or just the onboarding experience, that needs to be improved greatly to have more applications and more easy access to them. So I'm curious on how
100%.
the team at Mantle is approaching making the developer experience as easy as possible.
100%. So that's a great point, and that's what I feel like. So this is the, like, just to maybe zoom out a bit. So this is the problem with the ecosystem right now, right? So people are not, let's say, hyper focused on solving user side problems, because those are the unsexy problems to solve, right? Those are the problems around, like, user onboarding, fiat on ramp. Like, everybody wants to solve the sexy problem, like, oh, ZK, tell us more about that. So we need to, like, kind of like really go where the value ultimately is going to come from, which is, from the user. At Mantle, for example, we definitely want to look at developer experience in many different ways. Like, one part of for example, engaging developers is, of course, having great documentation, having great tutorials, sort of have a Discord channel which is alive, where you're covering questions, you're engaging the developers. But you brought up this very interesting point of developer experience, right? Which is exactly, I feel, how companies need to also start thinking, where developer engagement has to go one step up and become developer experience. Right, where we need to be able to create experiences for developers which allow them to, for example, also grasp and build and accelerate, like, more easily and become successful more easily. So, for example, at Mantle, outside of having great developer support, what we also want to do is we have a system where a developer comes in, let's say, at let's say zero, like, let's say with just a product. We have a very robust grant program, which we'll be talking about in the weeks to come. So you can get grants. Then we also are going to come up with our own ecosystem fund, a $150 million ecosystem fund.
Wow.
We're going to put up the proposal, in front of the DAO to invest in those companies. And then if the companies do well, they're able to build communities, they're able to build a great product, then we can take it all the way to listing on ByBit. So 0 to 100, like, in one ecosystem. Like, there are not many ecosystems out there which can help developers in this way. So I think that way our ecosystem is very uniquely positioned to do that. And like I said, I'm excited to talk about some of these other things which we're doing. For example, we have this small community of, elite developers called Sozu House, right? Where we're going to be doing events across the world and focused, like, on building on developer experience and, experimenting with models, where we work with partners to improve education for developers, help them make it easier and easier for them to deploy. And then again, focus on user side problems. And this is the best part of a collaborative model, where I can be focused on these problems, right? Versus having been stretched in 6-7 different directions. I can focus on those, let's say, boring problems, which are some of the most important problems we need to solve if we are to achieve any sort of mass adoption. So I think at Mantle, we're very well positioned to do these kind of things. And that's why I feel that, there's a very real chance that we can build something truly amazing.
Great, I'm looking forward to it. And I'm excited to hear more about those grants and getting more applications and developers involved into Mantle. But I would love to get more of a snapshot right now of, as the start of 2023, I feel like this is going to be a great year for layer 2 solutions. Can you talk about the testnet and where exactly Mantle is at right now with the ecosystem development?
100%. So our testnet is already out. Our testnet is an optimistic roll-up, but then here again, our technology teams have, sort of made iterations on the optimistic roll-up design to further improve it. So, for example, we've gone with a modular architecture. From day zero, we have data availability, implemented with EigenLayer's data availability solution. So it's still an alpha, but we wanted to implement it so that developers have a chance to go and see how to use it, and how it could potentially be beneficial to the blockchain. At the same time, we have innovations around, the 7-day exit period, which kind of plagues optimistic rollups to a sense, where we've come up with a multi-party computation approach, with a TSS signature scheme, right? And there's more, like, details on that in our documentation. But using an independent set of nodes, which also recalculates the proof, after the fraud proofs have been so, for example, the sequencers create the fraud proof. There's another independent set of nodes which again creates the fraud proof, and then you compare, right? And only if the match is when it goes to Ethereum. So thereby the 7-day period can now become 3 days or even 1 day, depending on the robustness and the decentralization of that MPC node network, right? So there are some very interesting innovations we brought to the table. And even on the fraud proof design, we're working with Specular and with other researchers and trying to see, what we could do there. So this is our optimistic roll-up approach. The testnet is out. For mainnet, like I said, we're also, like, very sort of in advanced sort of stages of figuring out how our ZK rollup need to look like, and what that means for our mainnet. Mainnet is something we're planning for maybe later in the year, somewhere possibly end of Q2, early Q3. Through this entire period, we will be engaging the community in all the important decisions with respect to the blockchain, communicating to them about our strategy, communicating to them about our ecosystem development plans, working with apps, and like also on the grant side, right? Like why grants are interesting is because, from Mantle's perspective, of course, it's a bear market. This is the time when developers need grants the most. So this is when you have to step up and help them. Like many other blockchains have stopped their grant programs, but I feel that'll hurt the developer ecosystem in the long run. So that's one point. Second point also is that it also allows me to decentralize the DAO faster and make it more powerful, the decision making more powerful over a period of time. Like using BIT token grants, I can put these tokens in the hands of builders, in the hands of actual users. And this will eventually, create a very net positive effect for the economy of the BitDao ecosystem, because the only other way of sort of doing that is to do some sort of an airdrop, right? But with airdrops, we've seen time and time again that the tokens end up in the hands of speculators versus actual builders. So the path we've chosen to also decentralize the DAO is more difficult. It will require a lot more effort. We will have to talk to hundreds of teams, if not like, maybe thousands of teams over a period of time. But this is the best way of building a really healthy and robust economy, is by putting the tokens in hands of actual builders who will bring users to the blockchain, and then helping creating incentives for users to use those apps so that they can also get a sense, okay, wow, there are all of these different apps out there, and this way, working along with the builder and the user, we can create sort of an ecosystem which continues to build value for the BIT community. So that's kind of how we're looking at this entire grant program and why it's strategic to us. Not just in terms of incentivizing developers, but also making the DAO and our governance even stronger with time.
Well said. And for the developers to follow along for the updates, to see when the grant program is available, and also just look at the documentation and find out how they can and how easy it is to develop on Mantle, what is the best way for them to get started with that and to learn more?
So the best thing, of course, follow us on Twitter. We post all of our announcements there. Also, join our Discord. So every week we do a Discord hour, like a Discord office hour, which is very informal kind of setting, where we do different tutorials, talk to developers, take their questions. So, just to get engaged with our community, check out our documentation. Please give us feedback on our testnet and our technology, innovation, so that we can, build better technology and bring that to the testnet. And then all the way to to mainnet in the months to come. So I think there's several ways to engage with us. Already, even without any grant program, we've seen amazing traction. So I was like very pleasantly surprised. There's so much interest. I just feel that if we can communicate to developers our 0 to 100 approach of helping them go from project to full-fledged company, I think it's gonna excite a lot of teams out there and who want to work with Mantle, sort of build their dream apps.
Amazing. Well, I'm excited for it. I'm going to follow along for the grant program and the path to mainnet as well. I will leave the link to the documentation and the Discord and the socials in the description box below as well. Arjun, thank you so much for taking the time to teach me and the audience about layer 2s and what Mantle's working on and how to properly build a layer 2 ecosystem. So I appreciate it, and all the best with Mantle moving forward.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It was great, being here and talking to you about this. And, I look forward to our next conversation.